time, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our beautiful Kathleen Kent, who's joining us tonight. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's wonderful to have tuned in a little early to hear what everybody's reading. I'm always fascinated to hear the different books. There's so many wonderful books out this year, and I'm always fascinated to hear what other readers are reading. So that
Absolutely. Yeah, we're so glad you were able to see that. That's one of our favorite parts that we do the first 30 minutes is we always talk about what we're reading, watching, and listening to, because good recommendations, I think. Word of mouth is always the best. All right, well, Kathleen, I'm so excited because not only are you a Dallas author, your books take place in Dallas, a big chunk of our book club is from Dallas, but before we get into the series, I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started writing.
Well, I didn't really start writing full-time until I was in my late 40s. I had gone to University of Texas at Austin with the intent to be a writer. I studied creative writing. I loved history, loved literature. But my dad, who was a very practical businessman, pulled me aside in my sophomore year and said, are you prepared to be a starving artist?
Oh,
you know, how do you plan to, to support yourself after college? So we talked about it, and I actually switched my studies to business. And when I left college, I went to New York. I lived and worked in Manhattan for 20 years, 10 years at the Commodity Exchange and 10 years as a contractor for the Department of Defense in Russia.
Oh, wow.
A lot of writing, but it was contract writing. And usually the DoD does not encourage creative writing. So, so it was 20 years of really interesting work in various commercial enterprises, and I got to travel, but always in the back of my mind, that desire to write just never went away. And so in 2000, I took an early retirement. I moved back to Texas. My son was about 4 years old at the time, and I didn't want to raise him in New York. So I just separated myself from the career I'd spent 20 years building, came to Dallas. He started school, and that's when I started writing, because I really wanted to, even if I only wrote one novel, I wanted to complete one book of fiction. And my first love has always been historical fiction. So the first book that I tackled was actually, it was based on family history. My 9 times great grandmother was hanged as a witch in Salem in 1692. Her name was Martha Carrier, and she figures quite prominently during the trials. And I grew up hearing stories about her. If you go to the history books, Cotton Mather called her the Queen of Hell because she was so vocal in her own defense. So I knew for a long time that this was going to be the first book. It might have been the only book, but it was going to be the book that I was going to tackle. And that's what I started doing. It took me 5 years to complete the novel. I had no contacts in publishing. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I loved the story, and it became a personal challenge. And so that's how I launched my career. I have 3 works of historical fiction, and now 3 works of the crime fiction, which are very, very different, totally different.
Yeah, like you probably had to put 2 different hats on to go into the mind for both of those different works.
Definitely. It was, and it was very unexpected because, writing the historical fiction, I love the research and I love history, especially American history. But I had written a short story for an anthology called Dallas Noir. And it was called Coincidences Can Kill You. And I just started developing this kind of larger than life force of nature, Betty Rhyzyk, who's a police detective. And I wrote the story thinking, well, that's a one-off. That's never going to, nothing is going to come of it. It was just fun. But the publisher thought that she was different, that she didn't check all of the boxes of the conventional, primarily male detective. It was heavy on character as well as plot. And it was set in Dallas. A lot of the famous mystery and crime novels are set in Chicago, LA, New York, Boston,
Mhm.
where there's a long history of great crime and mystery writers. And I thought Dallas, we are a big city. We're a very wealthy city, but we have the same problems that Boston or New York will have.
Mhm.
We have gangs, we have drug crimes, we have homicide. And so I thought I would take this very unusual character and set her in Dallas and kind of as an homage to Dallas.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so interesting just jumping in to talk about Betty a little bit. Like, how did she come to you? Because you hit it on the head. Like, she is so different. And the fact that she's not, you didn't decide to like Olivia Benson her and just stick her in New York City and kind of follow that same sort of pattern. She has her own identity. I'm so interested how her inspiration struck you.
Well, it was kind of I wanted to do something different. I wanted a female character, and in the three works of historical fiction, my female characters are pretty strong,
Mhm.
and they often negotiate their way through the world at the fringes of society. Martha Carey was very strong-willed. She was hanged as a witch. In the Outcasts, Lucinda Carter is a prostitute who's trying to escape that life of prostitution. So it's always been fascinating to me how women survive in hostile environments.
Mhm.
Half of the world and half of the history of the world belong to women, and perhaps because I spent 20 years working in male-dominated fields where sometimes I was the only woman in the room. And I really had to fight hard for my place at the table. And so I have an affinity for, and I'm drawn to very strong women.
Mhm.
So I knew that my female character was going to be singular. She was going to be strong. And in doing research, I spoke to a lot of retired police officers, and several of them were women. One of them in particular was a woman named Marilyn Hay, who was the first female detective that Dallas ever had.
Mhm.
And she got her detective shield in the 80s.
Wow.
And the thing that she had to go through, what she had to push up against to stay in law enforcement for 30 plus years was just phenomenal. And so some of the stories in The Dime and The Burn were kind of extrapolations of the stories that she had told me. And I had tremendous respect for these women that were, in Dallas law enforcement. The DPD has fewer female police officers than New York or Boston, because it's a newer phenomenon.
Right.
Having women in that field. I also have a cousin I'm very close to. He was in law enforcement in Plano. He's retired since, but he was vice undercover. He was narcotics undercover. He was the youngest officer in charge SWAT team. I mean, he was the original.
He has some stories.
Yeah, he had some stories. So I was always bending his ear, and he was always saying, okay, I'll tell you, but you have to change, the names to protect people. So he was a great source. Active duty policemen, of course, doing research was a challenge. When you're researching history, most everybody's dead. So it's easy to do history research, but active duty policemen can't talk to civilians. So I had to kind of foster relationships with sheriffs and police officers who were retired. And then they had the best stories, from the sublime to the ridiculous. So that was a lot of fun. Once I found my way in and they trusted me, then I could harvest all these great stories. The first three books were historical fiction, and pacing is important there too. But I think the tolerance from readers for historical fiction is more for the slow burn.
Right.
I think the expectation is we have more patience for character development, for plot development. We kind of, we allow ourselves to meander down that lazy stream. With crime, the pacing is very different, and it's kind of what I call bang out of the box. If you don't grab the reader within the first few paragraphs, you're probably going to lose that reader. So so that was something that took me a while to adopt and to be comfortable with. But it's just like anything else, it's like moving from the country to New York City. You kind of, you acclimate to that pace, you jump in. And so that was a challenge, but I really loved developing Betty and developing her story. So it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, and like I mentioned, a big chunk of our group is from Dallas. So we all have opinions on Dallas landmarks. Can you talk a little bit about making Dallas a character within the series and how you approach that? Because as you mentioned, like Dallas is not the place that a lot of people think of high crime, even though we are so close to the border or we're so close to oil corruption. Like there's lots of opportunity for that.
Sure. There's a cultural difference in exposing crime, media-wise. If you go to New York or Boston, crime hits the front page. Oftentimes crime, especially violent crime, makes its way to the back pages because there's been I think a concerted effort to present Dallas as a more genteel city. Certainly, we are wealthy, we're very privileged. And when I would go to book clubs and I talk about the gang wars and the drug wars, I think a lot of people were surprised sitting comfortably in their suburban settings because they don't necessarily see it. But talking to undercover cops, I was keenly aware of all of the things that were going on, the sex trafficking and the drugs and everything. And it's peripheral, but it's still here. I think growing up in Dallas as a kid, my dad's favorite joke was, what's the difference between Dallas and yogurt? And the answer was, yogurt has live culture.
Oh, rude.
We're talking about in the 60s,
That's
right?
True. You're right.
That has changed dramatically. I mean, we have wonderful world-class museums. We have art galleries. We have wonderful, literary salons. We've got a wonderful stable of Dallas writers that are coming up. So it's really, really changed. And I think, I think deciding that Dallas was worthy, it was strong enough to take the hard knocks. We've got so much to recommend itself to the world, but there's a dark side too. And also I think, living in New York for 20 years, when I came back to Dallas, I felt like an outsider. And Betty kind of reflects that feeling of being, she has to prove herself, that she's really not necessarily comfortable. She's competent, but not comfortable in the setting she finds herself. And I could really relate to that. I felt that very strongly when I first moved back. So I think that was, and I love Dallas. It was an homage to Dallas and the wonderful people that are here. We've got some, we don't, in the South, we don't call our eccentric people crazy. We just call them, interesting.
That's very true. And bless their hearts.
Yeah, I wanted to pay tribute to that and kind of capture the gestalt, the oil derricks and the bars and the wealthy people. Just kind of it's kind of an interesting mix of all of those things.
I love it so much. I just moved away from Dallas in May, and I'm like, oh, this is making me miss home a little bit. So sweet.
Yeah.
That's so cool. All right. Well, I have a couple of just fun, fresh fact questions that I'm going to throw at you, Kathleen.
Okay.
And here we go. All right. So what is your favorite genre to read?
Ooh. Oh boy, that's hard because I read everything. I'm an equal opportunity reader. I love crime. I love historical fiction. I love memoir. Now and a lot of times in approaching a new project, I do a lot of research and reading about that. So the newest book I'm working on is a spy thriller. So I'm reading a lot of, Jean Le Carré, Philip Carr, Robert Little type of, and true spy,
Yeah.
nonfiction spy stuff, which is, I'm totally geeky over that kind of stuff. I love it. So I mix it up a lot. I'll read something, like Isabel Allende's The Long Petal of the Sea, which was beautiful. It was so, poetic and beautiful. And then I recently read Frank Langella's memoir, which was very, gossipy and talking about the stars, the stage stars. So I just kind of whatever catches my fancy.
I love it so much. So I have to know, do you keep like a binder of potential murders now that you're going in this, suspense thriller spy direction?
Absolutely. The best stories are found a lot of times in these little town newspapers where the most outrageous crimes are committed, that, they say truth is stranger than fiction. And I kept a binder of a lot of those stories about, drug deals gone bad and people, trying to cook meth in the trunk of their car. There's just all of
like you do.
Yeah, like you do. Right. And so, you can find these little kernels of things, people behaving badly in big cities and small, but there's something particularly poignant about these small town capers that, that make you feel empathetic on one hand and just shake your head about how do these people survive past infancy?
Right.
So, and I wanted to, in the Detective Betty series, there's some very serious subjects. There's addiction and drug dealing, but there's also interpersonal relationships. And I wanted to have some humor, some humorous moments to break up the tension of the reality of what was going on. Some of the funniest people I know are cops. They just have a very irreverent, gallows sense of humor. And I wanted to have kind of this dry, sardonic, self-deprecating humor. She will, Detective Betty will sort of be harder on herself than anybody else. She'd be the first to call herself a jerk, when she behaved badly. So I wanted to have that kind of, the heavier the subject, sometimes the more welcome a lighter, more humorous interlude is. It helps kind of balance the weightiness of the subject.
Absolutely. Do you think, I know that you're going in the spy direction, but do you think historical might call you back to write some more historicals?
I had already started working on a sequel to The Outcasts, which was set in 1870 Texas after the Civil War. And I felt like I didn't want to say goodbye to the characters. I felt I wanted to give some of the characters a chance to redeem themselves.
Okay.
I actually already started working on a sequel to The Outcast, but the reality is you have to go where the publishing interest is. And they were more interested in developing the contemporary crime series than the historical fiction. But I think one day I will go back to it because I love, my favorite authors are Larry McMurtry and Cormac McCarthy. Texas is such a rich, it has such a rich history, and the landscape itself is a character. And so I'd like to return to that someday. So hopefully I will.
I love that. Do you think you'll always have Texas in your books?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the new one that I'm working on is very different. And it's based very, very loosely on some of the experiences that I had going to the former Soviet Union in the 90s. And so Texas doesn't really figure prominently in this one, but it kind of calls me back. It's sort of, I'm like a homing pigeon. I always turn to that.
Yeah, I love it. It's hard to avoid Texas. We're a loud crew.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
What is your favorite time of day to write?
Time of day to write? Usually I try to do it in the morning. My energy is best in the morning. I'll get up, do my walk, do my exercise, go through my emails, drink my coffee, and I try to, I try to get going around 9 or so. It doesn't always happen that way, but I have my best writing energy in the mornings.
Awesome. What is your favorite time of day to read?
Oh, usually because I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And if I can't go back to sleep, that's usually I'll read for a couple of hours early in the morning before everybody else gets up. And I just love reading at that time because it just feels like I'm in my little cave, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I do too, especially when it's dark in the morning too. So it's just, it feels very secretive.
Yes, it does. I love reading early in the morning.
That's great. What is a new hobby or practice that you've picked up recently?
Oh, well, COVID has made it a little challenging to do things in groups. Gosh, do I have a new hobby? Well, I've gone back to, taking yoga, Pilates, bar type of thing in a classroom, and I've kind of rekindled that, which is great. But apart from that, I just, I don't know.
I think that's pretty good. Yoga and Pilates out in public. I think that's pretty nice.
Yeah. That's been really great. But
I was expecting you to be like crocheting.
Oh gosh, no, I'm terrible at that. I'm terrible at that. But I think because I spend so much time reading and researching, that's what I love. I love cooking. But that's something that I've been doing all along. And I love travel, and hopefully, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but I love to travel, and hopefully by next year I can pick up and start doing some traveling. There've been a lot of author conferences that have been canceled, like BoucherCon in New Orleans was canceled, and that's for the safety of all. So so here we are on Zoom again.
I know. It's like we all live in our computers, I think, at this point.
I know.
Have you thought about your first like post-COVID big trip, not just like for work, but just like a vacation thing that you would like to do?
Definitely. I've already planned next fall, a year from September, the end of September. I'm going to go to Portugal. Which I've never been. I've been to a lot of different places in Europe, but I wanted to go someplace where I haven't been, and so that's the plan. And we'll spend probably 10 days doing that, and so I'm looking forward to that. I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. I think that's perfect too. It's something to look forward to, and you can always spin it as a potential expensed trip, because you could be like, "Oh, I'll put a spy in Portugal. It's fine."
Exactly. That's what you do.
Yeah, we'll be like, they go into the Basque country. It's fine. Who cares?
That's right. They hide out with the Basques. Right.
What is your favorite writing fuel?
Writing fuel? Well, so usually, Stephen King calls it the little men in the basement, the subconscious, and that sometimes you have to be able to do something to get out of your own way, to move aside conscious thinking and allow the subconscious to bubble up. And the ways I do that best are taking a long walk. I'll play music and just walk in and the act of walking freely out in nature opens up all kinds of channels for me. And the other thing is taking a long drive, just an aimless, pointless drive, or if I'm driving a long distance to, Houston or another city, driving, again, it's as though your conscious mind goes into autopilot, and it allows your more creative subconscious thinking to bubble up. So those are two ways that if I'm stuck, those are two great ways for me to kind of unblock the flow of ideas.
I love it. Well, I know that you've got to be thinking about this soon, because The Pledge, the final book in the Betty series, is out in November. But how do you normally celebrate a new release?
It's so funny because, in the movies, you'll see the writer typing the end.
Right.
And then that's it. And they open a bottle of champagne. But you go through so many weeks and months of editorializing, and then copy editing. And so it's sort of, in a way, it's a little anticlimactic because there's no great ta-da moment. It is exciting when the hard copy, when you can hold in your hand the hard copy and say, wow, it's real, it's tangible. Sometimes, I'll go out to dinner with my husband. We'll have some wine to celebrate. I'm a little bit superstitious.
Okay.
About making too big a deal of it. It feels a little bit like hubris. And there's a great scene, one of my favorite movies with Jane Fonda is Julia with Jason Robards. And it's about Lillian Hellman and the writer, not Mickey Spillane, but one of your readers will know. Anyway, they're on the beach and she's just had a tremendous success with the Children's Hour, and she's lauded and she's famous, and they're sitting on the beach and she's saying, oh gosh, my play's a success. What do I do now? Should I go to Europe? Should I buy a fur coat? And Jason Robards says, Julia, buy the fur coat, don't buy the fur coat. Just remember, it has nothing to do with writing. In other words, you celebrate. I would celebrate quietly, and then I go on to the next thing. And in fact, I've already gone on to the next thing. And so it's a curious kind of living in the future. I'm extremely grateful that I've had the support of Little Brown and Mulholland for 12 years now. They've been a fantastic home for me and always been supportive. And I always show my gratitude for that and never take it for granted. But I also think that, the joy is in the actual writing, when you get it right, when you feel like you're in the pocket, that, okay, this is not bad. That to me is celebratory. I probably get more excitement when I've gotten some really good pages down than even a publication date, if that makes sense, because it's the process, it's the journey that's so exciting.
I love that. I love that I guess process is the best word. The process of writing and the craft of writing is still fun for you.
Yeah, it's not always fun.
Right. But you still find that joy in there.
Yeah, but when you feel like that you've got it right, there's tremendous joy in that.
Yeah, I love that. All right, Kathleen, before I turn this over to our readers, how can readers stay in touch with you and find out more about you?
You can email me through my website, kathleenkent.com, or you can email directly at kathleenkent@yahoo.com. I answer all my emails. I check every day. I'm really faithful about responding to queries. And yeah, if you want to know more about the books, that my website, kathleenkent.com, talks in more detail about the historical fiction and the crime fiction and what will be coming up next. Hopefully in November, if we're in a safe place, I'll be doing, on November 3rd, I'll be in Terabang. I'll be doing some Murder by the Book. I'll be doing some book talks in November, which I'll post on my Kathleen Kent author Facebook page, and also on the website. So, I'd love to see some of your Dallas readers there. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. This was great. We're going to go ahead and end our recording, and we'll go and take questions from our readers right now.
Great.